Hello, I'm Andrew Child and this is the location in Fitzroy for a house for my own family. Along with accommodation, we were looking for the house to provide us with a number of living and working scenarios. We also explored how the broader context of Fitzroy might influence the character of the house, with the added objective of making a positive contribution back to this evolving suburb. The site runs west to east with a street at either end, George Street to the western front of the property and the narrower dead-end Hyde Place to the eastern rear. The property also has a strip of land 2.5 metres wide running inside the southern boundary, which was once used as a laneway. The existing building was an altered semi-attached double-storey Victorian and is the southernmost one of 5 attached terraces that comprise Charlemont Terrace. To the north of Charlemont Terrace is Chapel Street and the southern edge of a relatively new commercial zone. It's against this commercial zone edge that I became interested in amplifying the presence of Charlemont Terrace. Looking at the ground floor plan with the former laneway strip highlighted red, I used this strip as the catalyst for arranging the functions along the site, with the spaces in this strip serving the higher priority spaces in the original part of the property to the north. For my purposes, any space where you'd want to spend some time was a served space, any other was a serving space. Overall, the house was divided into a main house fronting George Street with a separate building addressing the rear street. In between is a courtyard with good northern sun access. Moving upstairs, the main house has a parents' area and the rear building has an office. All of these are served spaces. This is a view of Charlemont Terrace with the completed project from the other side of George Street. Our contemporary addition on the right reads as a kind of urban shadow line for Charlemont Terrace and bookends the entire building with the space of Chapel Street at the other end. Beyond to the left, you can see the scale of the buildings now being built in the adjacent commercial zone to the north. Just the house now, and you can see the obvious contrast in the colour, height and weight of materials between the Victorian and contemporary parts. The intention was to create a curious new side addition for Fitzroy, scaled to the pedestrian. You drive past in the car and you miss it. But we can always hear pedestrians out the front discussing whether the two parts are one combined residence or if the black building is a new separate skinny house. Moving closer again to show you some of the external materials used. This differing approach to scale and external materials between the two parts of the property continues along its length. So just inside the entry and looking down the hallway with the former external wall on the left, I was looking to set up more texture and colour than what's suggested by the house's relatively reserved street presentation. You can see a hint of the house's more public living space to the left beyond. Now, in setting up the nature of this public space, I surveyed a lot of Fitzroy's ad hoc laneways because there are a lot as a consequence of its early years as the first suburb after Melbourne. A lot of these laneways lead to dead ends or at best have a hint of the space beyond. Nearby, this is one of those spaces beyond. If you can find it, it's surprisingly large and flexible space unified under the sky and on ground materials of a single colour. The building walls bound the space, but there's an informality because of their differing coloured materials, and there's also a lessened sense of enclosure because, of course, they often don't join at the corners, or when they do join, the junction is often masked or unclear. I wanted to use some of these tactics to give the public space inside our new addition a sense of unity and flexibility, but with a lesser degree of formality and enclosure than those of the more private Victorian rooms in the original. So back to our house now, and this is the living portion of the main public space looking back up towards the laneway, our laneway. This overall space is a single volume unified on a single floor material and under a white lid, which is tilted up to the protected west with glazing and polycarbonate. Different materials, in this case recycled brick, are used on the bounding walls below the datum to separate the living from the kitchen and dining areas. Corner junctions between these materials are eliminated or masked, giving this space a lesser degree of formality and enclosure. So looking the other way through the kitchen dining space, which is framed by natural timber below the tilting white lid. In this instance, a black door, and in the other corner, the kitchen joinery and a curtain are used to disrupt the corner junctions between perpendicular walls. So the purpose of the rear building was to provide flexibility for us and how we might live, work and play on the property moving into the future. It was initially designed as a garage downstairs for the main house with an upstairs studio as a separate tenancy, with its own separate access from Hyde Place and its own downstairs powder room. Another option, essentially a granny flat for my soon-to-be adult son with sleeping, eating, studying upstairs and a bathroom downstairs, and the larger space as a habitable area. To accommodate this downstairs option, the materials, although still robust, were upgraded and a large window with an outlook to the central courtyard was added. So this is the rear street. It's a mixed bag of mainly detached characters from different eras. Two tiny houses comprise a protected cottage of high heritage significance just to the south of our site down the bottom. And this is an elevation of the rear building, our rear building. It draws from the materials of the other characters in the street and continues the same external colour, weight and height dynamic which began at the front end of the site. To mark the former corner where the laneway used to meet this rear street, the larger white portion has a large wraparound corner window which provides the only protected view from the upper storey across the top of the heritage listed cottage, which you can just see to the left of this image. So in the top space, this is looking back towards the top of the stairs behind the shelving. The polycarbonate wall and windows behind the shelving and above the stairs floods this upper level with natural light. You can see the long distance view across the top of the heritage building through that corner window. The curtain on the right edge can be swapped for a block-out drape and be drawn fully across to remove all this light should this level be used for a bedroom. And this is a more frequent view from the top of the street, from the passing pedestrian on the way to the shops, with the building on the left down the bottom, with that large corner window poking above its heritage neighbour. This is from inside the downstairs space looking through the courtyard to the rear of the main house. My son currently uses this space for music and video editing, so the design of the wall and ceiling construction and the apertures were upgraded accordingly. It also highlights the engagement that can happen and be altered between these spaces depending on who is in them and what they are being used for. At the moment, my teenager generally shuts all doors, pulls down the blinds and wraps himself in that green drape to get as far away from us as possible. Looking through the courtyard to this rear building from inside the main house, and you can again see the potential for opening up the level of engagement between these spaces. So this is looking back at the house addition, which defines the western edge of the courtyard. The roof of this large lean-to was tilted down to allow afternoon sun and moderate the feeling of enclosure. And looking the other way through the courtyard, which is where we come together on warmer days. The timber screen to the upper right of this wall provides overlooking protection for the neighbouring open space. But it can be closed for western summer sun protection and to indicate that work is done for the weekend. Although this wall will eventually be covered in creepers, this is an image from a month ago. My son skateboards around the area with his mates and they film it and make movies. They've made themselves a little community. This is a showing of the film where they had about 30 people, which were a mixture of local skaters and friends. I like this image because it captures one of the objectives of the project, in that it integrates with and contributes to the suburb of Fitzroy. Thank you.